Good morning, everybody. I am really delighted this morning to have Dr. Chris Hahn with us to talk about her work. But because this is our first time together as this group, and because I wanted Chris to know who her audience really is, if we could take 1 second and just go around and say hello and where you're from, I think that would be really helpful. I'll do it from my screen if I can, so we don't lose track. And I'll begin with my general counsel, Mary Beth.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mary Beth Long. I'm the general counsel for DA Ryan. I've been in the office for about 18 years and have tried many domestic violence cases.
All right, Megan.
Hi, my name is Megan Kelly. I'm also with the district attorney's office, and I handle her press and communications.
And DA Wickstrom from DA Early's office.
Good morning. My name is Mary Pat Kelly Wickstrom, formerly of the Middlesex DA's office a long time ago. I prosecute domestic violence crimes in Worcester now. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you. Eileen, I haven't seen you for so long.
Hi, I'm Eileen Dern. I'm the Director for Community Services for Melrose Wakefield Healthcare, and we support a local domestic violence agency, Portal to Hope, by allowing them to use space here at our facilities and provide their internet and all of that. So a big issue for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Natalie.
Hi, my name is Natalie Bertrand. I am the High Risk and Safe Housing Coordinator here at Alternative House.
Hey, Mike, you go.
Yes, I'm Mike Hugo, and I am Director of Government Affairs for the Mass Association of Health Boards. And hello, I see a lot of familiar faces. Good to see you all.
Thank you. Captain LeBlanc.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark LeBlanc. I'm a captain with the Lowell Police Department. I'm in charge of the Investigative Services Division. So the Family Services Unit, which investigates all of our domestic violence, falls under my command. Good morning.
And Lieutenant Thibodeau.
Hi, good morning. Joe Thibodeau from North Reading, and I'm the Domestic Violence Coordinator for the Police Department.
And one of our longtime domestic partners, Jacqueline Apsler.
Well, good morning. I'm Jacqueline Apsher, the Executive Director of Domestic Violence Services Network, and delighted to be with us again.
And Malika.
Good morning, Malika Ting, Community Liaison for the Lowell Police Department.
And Sue Jeslonis. We're spending every day this week together on Zoom.
Yes, peer recovery coach, loud and proud, Malden District Court, and I have many that are suffering from domestic violence, and I'm so glad to be here.
Thank you. And Councilor Besner Noon from Lowell, who is really part of the reason we got this task force up and running again today. I'm so happy to see you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, DA Ryan, and hello, everyone. I'm glad that we have Dr. Hahn to talk about the issues that impact the AAPI community, and I'm delightful to learn more today from her. And I thank you, DA Ryan, for all her work. By the way, I'm a former employee of Middlesex DA years ago. So
we know that. Well, I had come back. And Marianne Manzi.
Good morning, Marianne Manzi, and I am the Public Safety Research and Planning Director for the Lowell Police Department.
Matthew Page Shea.
Good morning, Matthew Page Shelton. I'm the Regional Director for the Frontline Initiative. I serve as the head of the Police Mental Health Collaborative covering Tewksbury, Chelmsford, Billerica, Dracut, and Kingsborough. And as a part of our work, we do work with victims of domestic violence.
And one of our great partners and one of the places that we're really looking to expand this education, particularly into the schools, is Superintendent Edouard Vincent.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Maurice Edouard Vincent. I'm Superintendent of Schools in Medford, and I'm really glad to be on the call today. Thank you.
Thank you. And Steve Morris.
Morning. Steve Morris. I'm Chairman of the Woburn Medical Reserve.
Dave Hunt.
Hi, good morning. My name is David Hunt. I am the Vice Chairman of the Woburn Medical Reserve Corps, and I'm the producer of the television show America in Crisis, Breaking the Cycle of Addiction. And actually, in the next 30 days, I'm going to be doing a featured show on the RAD program with School Resource Officer Ed Fumicello, actually addressing everything we're going to be talking about here today.
Great, thank you. Another one of our longtime partners on so many issues about women and kids, Donna Sherrill.
Hi, I'm Donna Sherrill, the Assistant Chief Nursing Officer of Winchester. Happy to see you all again.
Brian Nadell.
Morning, everyone. I'm Brian Nadeau. I am the chair of the Belmont Human Rights Commission.
Marissa Daly.
Hi, nice to meet everyone. I've never sat on this group before. I am
welcome.
Thank you. I am the Assistant Director of Home Visiting. I'm representing the Children's Trust today.
And one of our longtime partners, again with kids, Anthony Guardia.
Hi, I'm Anthony Guardia. I'm with the Boys and Girls Clubs of Stoneham and Wakefield, and very, very happy to be here and to see everybody.
Thank you. And Griffin.
Morning, everyone. I am the Chief of Staff for Representative Kate Hogan. It's nice to be here and to see some familiar faces myself. Looking forward to a productive conversation.
Welcome. And one of our stalwarts from Lowell, Bill Garr.
Hi, I'm Bill Garr. I'm the CEO of Lowell House Addiction Treatment and Recovery, a longtime agency in Lowell and a good partner for the DA, we hope, and painfully aware of the relationship between domestic violence, addiction, and mental health issues. So we're glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And you know, so much of what we do, we are able to do, excuse me, because of our great legislative partners. And one of our strongest partners, I'm really happy to see joining us today, Senator Eldridge.
Great. Thank you so much, DA Ryan. State Senator Jamie Eldridge, Middlesex and Worcester District, and thanks so much for having me. Great to see you all.
Thank you. Liz Lidestone.
Good morning, everyone. I am the Director of Maternal Child Health and the OBED here at Circle Health in Lowell. Thank you.
Thank you. And Shin-Yi Lau.
Hi, I'm Shin. Yeah, good morning. I'm Shin-Yi Lau. I'm the public health nurse over in Newton.
And Tobin from Representative Wynn's office.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tobin Abraham, and I am the Legislative Director for Representative Trom Wynn of the 18th Essex District. It's nice to see everyone.
And Lieutenant Marisol, I just can't see your last name.
Nobrega. Good morning, everyone. My name is Marisol Nobrega. I'm a lieutenant with the Lowell Police Department. Been here for 23 years, and I'm currently in charge of the Family Services Division.
Stacy Schulman. No, maybe she stepped away. Joyce Cow.
Good morning, everyone. This is Joyce, Clinical Manager of Asian Task Force. Thank you. Good to meet you, everyone.
And another one of our great legislative partners and folks that I know were up late last night working on the budget. Representative Dr. Chin.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. State Representative for the 14th, Middlesex, Concord, Carlisle, Acton, and Chelmsford. And I'm so pleased to be here with all of you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy Bocci.
Good morning, Nancy Bocci, Deputy Director of Health and Human Services with the City of Somerville.
Great, thank you. And Hannah Burnett.
Yes, hi, nice to meet everybody. I am a public health nurse for Needham.
Well, welcome. And one of our friends from the schools, Lisa Evangelista.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I work with Superintendent Edward Vincent. We do a lot with the District Attorney's Office. They're a great partner of ours. Nice to meet everybody.
And Tanina.
Hi, everyone. Tanina DeWitowitz. I work for Respond as our Law Enforcement Partnership Coordinator. I oversee our civilian advocates that work for 6 different police departments that we're partnered with, which includes Reading, Woburn, Wilmington, Malden, Melrose, and Wakefield. And thanks so much for having me today.
And Officer Rossi.
Good morning, Lieutenant Rossi from Natick PD. The majority of my work now, thanks to Chief Hicks, is in community services, which includes all of the topics that everyone has brought up. So I'm happy to be here and be included and learn today. Thank you.
Thanks, Lieutenant. And Christine Downs.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Downs, the Director of Quality Assurance at the Office of the Child Advocate. We are new to this group and really appreciate the opportunity to be here. So thank you.
Welcome. Jenna Bancroft.
Hi, everyone. Jenna Bancroft. I'm the Assistant Director of Social Services for the City of Newton.
And somebody else I'll be spending the day on Zoom with, Sharu.
Hi there, I'm Charu Verma. I'm a staff attorney at CPCS and the co-chair of the Massachusetts Bar Association Criminal Legal Section Council.
Thank you. Brianna Dunn.
Hello, I'm Brianna Dunn, Unit Director of the Boys and Girls Club of Stoneham in Wakefield. Nice to meet everyone.
Thank you. And Anthony Langone.
Morning, everyone. Anthony Langone, and the legislative aide for Rep. Haggerty, and looking forward to the conversation this morning.
Ashley Griffin. Stacy Schulman.
Hi, good morning. I'm Stacy Schulman. I'm the Director of School Counseling and Behavioral Health for Medford Public Schools. Good to be here.
And Becca Bueno.
Hi, my name is Becca Bueno. I'm Representative Kate Lippberger at BDN's legislative aide. She represents all of Melrose, half of Wakefield, and part of Malden. Thank you so much for having us.
And Brianna, Brianna Dunn, we're especially happy you got here this morning. We're here. This is your first meeting back after having twins. So welcome.
Yes, it is. Thank you so much.
And Ted Thomas.
Hello, everyone. I'm a legislative aide for State Senator Bruce Tarr and excited to be here.
And first initial A, Melanson.
Hi, this is Alana Melanson from the Lowell Sun. I'm here covering your meeting today.
Oh, great. Thanks for your interest. And Ashley Griffith. Okay. I'm hoping, and my director of our racial justice initiatives, Antonia.
Good morning, everyone. Antonia Source Thompson. I'm the Director of Racial Justice Initiatives for DA Ryan's office. Very excited to work in collaboration for this important work.
All right, I think that I have gotten everybody I can see, and if I haven't, accept my apologies. And if you join in and to ask a question or make a comment and I didn't get you, please introduce yourself. I am really delighted to have people back to this meeting. And just to give people a little bit of history, probably about 20 years ago, and Vesna knows this history well. When there were a number of people who were really suffering in relationships that were violent within their families, within the American Asian and Pacific Islander community, who were reluctant for a number of reasons to come forward and to talk to the police or to seek some of the social services that were available. We created a task force to start looking at those issues and how could we be more helpful. And I think that task force worked for a long time. Lots of progress was made. We partnered with lots of agencies. I think we really did a good job at that time in getting people to be more willing to speak about these issues, to find services that were culturally and linguistically appropriate. And I think, like what has happened in some other areas, maybe we thought we had done such a good job that there was no longer a need for that. And we really rolled that task force into our high-risk domestic violence task force and went along for quite a while. And I think some of the issues that have happened over the last year and a half have really brought back to us the need to readdress the issues in not just the AAPI community, but many of our communities from other countries that come to Middlesex County. You know, Middlesex County is enormous. We are fortunate to be diverse in every possible way. We have representation from an enormous number of racial, ethnic groups across our county. We have in our county one of the UN sanctioned refugee groups and populations that really reflect every place in the world. And when we think about things like domestic violence, when for everyone, that is something that's hard to admit to yourself, it's hard to go talk about, And it is very often hard to take advantage of services, even if services are available. And then we compound that by maybe having to talk about some of the most intimate things in your life to people who don't speak your language, where you might literally, in the worst case situation, be trying to use a translator on the telephone to tell someone something terrible that's happened to you. And then in order to protect yourself and perhaps your children, be looking to go to a place that is certainly not home and may not be a good fit for you in so many, many ways. So I'm really happy to be beginning again to take a look at how do we best serve those members of our community around these issues of domestic violence. And I think based on the work we've done together and the work that we've been able to accomplish through these task forces, that we really will make a great difference and have an impact on people's lives through these conversations, through brainstorming here, and putting in place alternatives for people. And one of the people I'm so happy to have joining with us to do that is Dr. Ham. Chris Ham has been incredibly generous to us with her time and talent in the last few months as we've been looking at these issues. She is a busy woman, a professor and chair of the Social Research Department at Boston University School of Social Work. Her work focuses on various aspects of what we're going to be looking at, which is the healthcare utilization among Asian American adolescents and sexual minority populations, people with mental illness, and acculturation and risk behaviors among Asian Americans. Dr. Ham has a bachelor's degree from the School of Social Work at the Seoul Women's University in Seoul, Korea. She received her master's in social work and her PhD from the School of Social Work at Columbia University. And her PhD dissertation focused on the health risks behavior that are particular to Asian American adolescents, and the social cultural risks and the parental protective factors that they had in place. She completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of California in Berkeley. She is, as you can tell, a licensed social worker and has worked as a psychotherapist and a psychiatric social worker. She's been a visiting professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and has written extensively in this area. She is also somebody who makes the difficult very easy to understand in speaking. So I'm really delighted to have her here as our inaugural presenter at this task force. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you so much, dear Ryan. And thank you so much for the gracious introduction and inviting me for this incredible event. I am very humbled and privileged to be here. So what I would like to do is that I'm going to make a presentation on Asian American experiences, especially during the COVID-19, for about 25 minutes, and then we can go from there. We can have a discussion. So I would like to share my screen. Okay. So America in Korean is written as Migu. These are based on the two Chinese characters. Mi means beauty, Guk means country. When we put these two words together, America becomes a beautiful country. So growing up in Seoul, Korea, I had a fantasy about America. I imagined a beautiful country with the charming people and great economic opportunities, a land of democracy, justice, and equity. In this beautiful country, we've been dealing with crisis, health crisis, crisis with racism, crisis with violence. This statistic is from the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism. When you look at this, the overall hate crime in the US actually dropped 7% in 2020, but the hate crime targeting Asians increased by 150%. You can see the big cities such as New York City, LA, Boston substantially increased the hate crimes. And this is vandalism. Vandalism is part of the hate crime. And what the vandalism and hate crime does is that it instills fear in every single members of the targeted group. Now, we are fortunate to receive the funding from NSF, National Science Foundation, to study the impact of COVID-19 among young adults in the US. And this is a study based on Asian American young adults. And after 3 months, when the COVID-19 pandemic was announced, 68% of young Asian American adults, they reported that they themselves or their family members have been experiencing or have been exposed to specific COVID-19 anti-Asian discrimination. And 15% of them reported that they were the victim of either verbal assaults or physical assaults. Now, those people who experienced COVID-19 discrimination was associated with higher rates of PTSD. So the PTSD symptoms include intrusive thoughts, anger, and low self-esteem, hypervigilance, sense of numbness, and somatic symptoms. Now, behind every numbers, there are stories. So these are some of the stories that was reported by our research participants. My dad sent me a text about an Asian woman who got acid thrown at her and tells me to be careful. I tell him I live in a predominantly Asian neighborhood, so it's okay, but in reality, I'm scared. My dad also tells me that he gets stares at the grocery stores when he wears a mask. While nothing direct has happened to either of us, we live in fear. My youngest cousins are 2 and 5 years old and have been kicked out of their preschool because of their race. Now, these experiences are called racialized trauma. And these 3 stories has common themes. One is there is a sense of loss of safety. And these people are collectively grieving. And there is a sense of shame. Now, it's been over a year since COVID-19 pandemic was announced. And we now see that Asian Americans have a higher rates of long-term unemployment. You can see the second graph here. And Asian American children, adolescents, students are the most reluctant to return to the school. And this was based on Globe about a week ago. So 35%, only 35% of Asian American students in Boston Public School wanted to return to the school. This rate is substantially lower compared to all other races. You can see this. Now, another study reported by Stop AAPI Hate, according to this study, showing that the reason why they don't want to go back to school, in part, is because 1 in 4 of Asian American youth surveyed experienced discrimination, verbal harassment, social shunning, cyberbullying, physical assault during the pandemic. Now, we have to understand that this discrimination against Asians are not new. In fact, it started from hundreds of years ago. As you have heard many times by now, many Chinese came to this country during gold rush, and they built railroads. And at that time, Chinese became a threat of taking jobs from Americans. And in 1871, actually there was one of the largest mass lynching in American history took place in LA, when 19 Chinese residents were killed by a white mob. Several years later, Congress enacted the Chinese Exclusion Act that was actually in 1882. And that enabled for Chinese people to become ineligible for the naturalization. So as you can see from these pictures, Chinese and Asians have been perceived as economic threats and untrustworthy and immoral. Now, I want to talk about 3 pervasive biases and prejudice against the Asians, which are very, very common things that you hear all the time. So there's one thing which stands out nowadays, especially nowadays, is perpetual foreigners. What it means is that no matter how many years you lived in this country, if you're Asian, you are seen, you are viewed as foreigners. So let me give you an example. So, when you recall last year, Rhode Island, there was some time that Rhode Island was really protective of their own state, right? So they were like on and off about restriction in terms of when other people from the other states were coming in. During that time, actually the restriction was loosened. So one day our family, so now we have 3 children and I have my husband, and we love to go to the beach. In Massachusetts, of course, everybody wants to go to the beach. So we went to the beach in Rhode Island. It's called the Second Beach, which is really, really beautiful. So we were having a really good time. Nothing really happened. It was in July. And we came out of the beach and now we are trying to get into the car. So, our license plate is obviously Massachusetts. Now, the one guy who's driving by our car is yelling at us, "Go back home," And we are all puzzled by it. First of all, we are upset, but we are puzzled by it. Go back home? Where? Home to Massachusetts or home to Asia? In the car, our family members had to debate what that really means. My children unanimously thought that, no, they are saying that we should go back home to Massachusetts. But to me, no, we are going back home to Asia. Now, modern minority stereotypes. So you hear all the time, Asians work hard, they have good grades, they go to top schools, they are wealthy, they don't have problems. Now, yes, apparently, when you look at some of the statistics like this, which is very common statistics, it seems like Asians are doing very well because the median income for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are topping. They're at the top among all groups. However, it is very important for us to recognize the diversity within Asian Americans. When you look at this, yes, Asian Indians and Filipinos, actually these are the groups that they actually speak English in their own country, original countries. Many of them are speaking English. So when they come here, they have a less problem of communicating. So they tend to have a very high socioeconomic status as well as higher income. However, when you look at the other groups, Laotians, Hmong, Cambodians, and Vietnam, Burmese, these groups, we are talking about the people who are in poverty. We're talking about Asian American groups. And these groups are really suffering, but they do not get any attention. And another interesting statistic is that Asians in the top 10% of the income distribution earn almost 11 times as much as Asians in the bottom 10%. And the diversity and disparity of income among this group is the greatest, greater than Black, greater than White, greater than Latinx. Now, you may think, we also think that Asian American students are successful in their school academic work, but we need to understand that Vietnamese, Laotian, Hmong, and Cambodians, 25 to 30% of the students, they are completing less than a high school diplomas. Now, number 3 is invisible minority. So what it is that a lot of Asian people suffer from sense of being invisible. So this is a quote from one of my doctoral student at UPenn. Invisible minority. We don't understand racialized trauma unique to Asian American communities, not because we don't feel it, but because we don't talk about it. We don't know how to. Our parents didn't bring it up. Our teachers didn't profess it. Our politicians never mention it. There is no discourse, no social movement, no textbooks, no hashtag to express the racialized psychic conditions. Okay, then I talked about those three types of the prejudice and the struggles that Asian Americans are dealing with daily basis. Then what are the sequelas? What are the consequences? Number one is mental health effects. And these mental health effects, this is my expertise in my research. We actually studied more than 2,000 Asian American young adults and adolescents. And by observing them, by talking with them, by treating them, I was able to come up with a theory called the trap model. So when I was looking at Asian American children and young adults, I realized that these people are trapped in multiple layers of the traps. First one is the inner voice trap. It's a psychological trap. They have a tremendous pressure to achieve. And even though they achieve a lot, even though they are successful, they feel like they're never good enough. And furthermore, they have a lot of conflicts within the family members. There's a acculturation gap between the parents and adolescents, and there's a language barriers, and there's a not actually understanding the culture from the parents creates a lot of barriers and a lot of conflicts within themselves. The next one is race trap. Even before pandemic, these young adults or the children have been exposed to daily basis of the microaggression and sense of invisibility. Despite of all these struggles, they do not take advantage of mental health system in America. So some of the epidemiological findings shows that Asian American young youth are having higher rates of depression compared to African Americans, Hispanic, and white. And Asian Americans tend to worry more than other groups. Asian American students also have a higher rates of anxiety. And furthermore, they consider suicide higher than white group. And in fact, when you look at the Asian American young women, suicide was a #1 cause of death for Asian American young women, whereas suicide is a #2 for other race women. Now, despite of all this, Asian American people, young people, are least likely to have a mental health diagnosis, least likely to seek mental health psychotherapy, and least likely to receive drug or medication treatment. Now, I'm going to move on to structural inequality and inequity. This is really shocking, but this was published in 2019 in JAMA Network. So Doan et al., they did incredible research, archiving, investigating 26 years of NIH database. And they discovered that NIH, National Institute of Health, spent 0.17% of the total budget for clinical research on Asian Americans plus Native Americans, Hawaiians plus Pacific Islanders. But we cannot forget that Asian Americans are the fastest growing population in the US. This group exceeded Latinx population. And really, I have to give a credit to NIH because NIH recently announced a very important initiative called NIH Unite, because NIH really wants to grapple with the structural racism. So they said, we're gonna put a lot of federal money in, okay? So really apply this. However, among the people who are going to be the priority groups, again, Asian Americans were not included. This time, Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders were included with the priority group, but not Asian Americans. Sorry, I don't know what happened. Okay. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Now, this one is a city or the state level. So in 2017, we're talking about the New York City. Despite the Asian population comprising almost 14% of the population in the New York City, again, Asian American organizations were only granted 1.4% of the total spending for the social services contracts. And there are many reasons. Part of the reason is because of the language difficulties too. Because we have to understand that 75% of Asian American population in the US, they are foreign born. So Asian Americans also have the greatest language barriers in America too. And I see that, among you, I see many state representatives, and we have a senator here. Thank you very much for coming. But then again, Asian Americans are also underrepresented in public policy, making up only 3% of the Congress. You're looking at an Asian American woman here, right? Asian American women are least likely among all women to be promoted to the leadership position. And I am the first Asian American, not just woman, but Asian American per se, to be promoted to full professor at the School of Social Work at BU. So you can see this pervasive, and this is like permeable in every single sector of United States. And in some, dealing with and having worked with Asian American families many years, I recognize these simple facts. They are immigrants and they are children of immigrants. By default, they have high ambition, but they also have a high stress. And now they are living in fear. Fear of violence, fear of death, fear of being shunned. But they also don't have resources. They don't know the resources. And they don't really have a lot of support. So what do we do? What do we do? How can we help this group? I think number one is that I think we really need to have the bold approach from the federal investment for API health. I talked about NIH, how little they have been investing the health of Asian Americans. I mean, if you think about it, who's going to take care of Asian American health if National Institute of Health neglect Asian Americans' health? And what that means is that we don't have data. Okay, if there's no money for the research, there's no money for the data. And if there's no data, you cannot come up with a responsive policy. And if you don't have a policy, then people who are living here is going to maintain the status quo and nothing is going to change. So the research is going to be important and the data collection is going to be important. Disaggregating the data is going to be really critical. Number two is that it's so critical for us to have an ongoing conversation for talk on race. The conversation on race should not be just matter of white and black conversation. We need to include Asian Americans in the racial discourse. And we can do it through affinity group. We can do it through the intervention. I actually have created an intervention to talk specifically about this trap model. We talk a lot about races, and it has been such a healing aspect for the adolescents as well as the college level young adult women. And we also promote a bystander intervention. Number three is education policy. People don't understand the role of Asian Americans in this country. People don't have appreciation for Asian Americans. That is a part of the reason why I think that Asian American has been such an easy target for the violence. So education is going to be really critical. And we need to recognize the fact that words are seeds for the violence. And also, we need to also recognize that the violence or this kind of conversation of the education should not stop in class. It has to also spread it to the sports policy, because so many Asian American children are suffering in the field, dealing with all different kind of discrimination. So diversity and inclusion training for the coaches, parents, children is going to be also critical. Finally, how can we instill hope to our children? How can we instill hope to ourselves? I think really at the end of the day, what we need to do is actions, the activism and allyship. I can give more examples, but this is how I'm going to end my presentation. And thank you so much for listening.
So maybe, Chris, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about how you think that translates into the family situations. Like what piece of that? It seems to me there's lots of pieces of that would make it more difficult to expose a bad family situation to public scrutiny.
So can you tell a little bit more about what, can you speak a little bit more about that? So I want to understand. Like,
what do you think that some of the pieces of your work are what contribute, for instance, to somebody who is in the AAPI community who might be experiencing danger in their own home, would make them more reluctant to report that or to let people know about what's going on in their house?
Yes, definitely, definitely. Number one is, a lot of Asian American families are in isolation and they are segregated. A lot of them have their own network, but they are kind of isolated in a way that they don't really have a social life with other racial groups. And I can also see that I was actually kind of surprised to see this one. And even though you are born in America, the racial segregation or lack of socialization with other race groups are not that common. So because they are in a kind of vulnerable situation, and also many of Asian Americans are undocumented, as you know, so they are really afraid of reaching out for the help. So there are some reasons of reaching out for the help. Number one is a language issue. The parents, they don't tend to speak English really well or understand this law. It's very, very complicated. And number two is that these are children of immigrants. So children of immigrants, by definition, they don't have a lot of family networks, right? They may be the first generation, so they don't have. So if they lose their parents, they're gonna be orphans or they're gonna lose their house, right? So that in itself is putting them in a very vulnerable situation. So even though they may observe the domestic violence among their parents, they may be the victims of domestic violence at their home, they are going to be in denial.
What do you think is an effective strategy for trying to deal with that denial?
Effective strategy, one of the effective strategy could be the language services. And then number two is that long-term education is going to be really important. And I think that some of the, like youth, so for instance, I live in Newton, and I discovered that in Newton Police Station, we actually have a 1-week program. So police officers is running the camp, and it's free. And actually, it's very popular. I wanted to get my children to get into the program, but I couldn't get into the program because I was on the waiting list. My children were on the waiting list. But they run 1-week program. And they have such a, they go to zoo, they have such a great time. Of course, right now is a COVID situation, so it's kind of different. However, we can also be creative. So I think like law enforcement or the DA office, we need to have some kind of pathway to acquaint the Asian American communities, get to know them. Because when the crisis occur, people are kind of backing off because there is a lack of trust in the system. And there's a lack of trust because they don't know each other. There's a word called the more you know, the more you love. Like if you don't know each other, how can you love each other? How can you rely on your help? How can you get help? So I think some kind of strategy to target the group and youth group, to get to know them, to hear their concern, to talk about their problems. I think it's going to take some time, but I think that's going to be one of the effective strategies.
What about with adolescents? I mean, what kind of message are they getting about relationships and safety and what's acceptable in a relationship? Do you think there's a lot of that, or is there a lot of that conversation happening?
Okay, so we studied the sexual risk behaviors as well. And our aware intervention, 1 week is out of 8 weeks, but 1 week is targeted for sexual risk behaviors. And we were very surprised to find that these young Asian American women who were mostly born in America, they were exposed to high rates of domestic violence, not only from their parents, but their romantic partners. And it varies. There's a really extreme violence as well as sexual assault and uncomfortable, making feel psychological aggression. So psychological aggression was most common, area of aggression. But besides aggression, there were a lot of different kind of aggressions they were experiencing. And part of the reason why is because parents don't have the conversation about that. Having like conversation on sex, conversation on death, conversation on HIV and AIDS, and conversation on suicide. Those are really big taboo. Of course, this is taboo for any culture. I get that. However, in Asian American cultures, it is even extra taboo issues. So, even adolescents, they grow up not having the languages and not really understanding the context. So it is very hard. So they don't really have capacity to deal with these issues, even though that it occurs to them.
Comments, questions for Dr. Ham?
I do. It's Donna.
Donna, do you want to put your question in the chat? While we're waiting for that, other people have comments, questions? What this means for the various work that we're doing. Vesna, anything for you to add?
Thank you, DA Ryan. Dr. Hunt, a lot of information to digest, but you're right, education is key, and that's why DA Ryan and I will reconvene a group here in Lowell. Despite COVID, there's a lot of ways we can send message out there, educate the community, not just around the issue of domestic violence and sexual assault. It's all linked with the Asian community. When you have domestic violence, there's always that sexual assault to it, because you don't disclose that even to service providers out here in Lowell. So those are information that we will, try to educate, having all party together, either DCF, the police department, and the Rape Crisis Center, which is now the Center for Hope and Healing, and Asian Task Force, to reconvene the group and educate the community through various means, because clearly, the isolations with a lot of his families, and also there's a lot of arranged marriage and whatnot, that came from Asia. That you lose the status and so on and so forth if you report it. So a lot of those things, DA Ryan and I know the DA office is very, very aware of this, and so we need to educate not just the victim as to where to get help and all that, but also educate men as well. That this is not back home. This is America. This is you don't do this to your family. So those are some of the things that really I hope that with DA Ryan that reconvene the task force, and so to educate the community on this. Thank you, DA Ryan.
And excuse me, if it's okay for me to also say
Sure,
something.
of course, Joyce, go ahead.
Thank you. So this is Joyce from Agent Task Force. And again, thank you, Dr. Han, for sharing your thoughts and your research. And I also wanted to say something as our practice, how we serve our AAPI community survivors. So I think the first thing I wanted to say is that when we are serving our AAPI community, our AAPI survivors in the community, and when we're helping them, supporting them to work with police, with the language barrier, there are some of the barrier I think is really affecting the community and is really putting damage to the survivors. So for example, what we all know, language barrier is a huge thing when we're trying to connect survivor to the support they need. And I think what we wanted to say is language barrier is beyond just having a language line or interpreters. And what we have seen is that there's one experience. We have accompanied a client to a police department and to report a sexual assault cases. And because we have request to have an interpreter to be able to have the client talk to the police directly with the language support. And we have been waiting in the police department for 3 hours without being able to getting one. And this is sexual assault survivors we have talked to her for so long, and finally she has the courage and decide to report this. And 3 hours without being able to getting one detective to speak with her. And a separate cases, also a sexual assault survivor. And I've accompanied this client directly to the DA's office to talk about her cases. And in the office, they have had interpreters in the office to translate for the client. And it's very unfortunate that during the interview process, when the client is describing the process in a detail about how she was being abused, and the interpreter somehow laughed in the process. And I don't know if that's a laugh because they thought the detail they described as funny, or they could be laughed out of, uncomfortableness, or just, with those graphic detail. So I want to say, this are all showing a thing that when we're talking about language as assets, this is really way beyond just, getting a language line there. It's more than that. And it has putting so much more effect on the survivor, that how the message delivered is that I am scared to report the incident because I know and I've heard the experience is this gonna put more damage on me. Sorry. And I think beyond the interpreter part is a lot of the time when our survivor talk to us, like the experience they have when they're reporting to police is they feel like the people over the other end, when talking to them, always seems very impatient because they can't speak fluent English. It takes them more time to express what they wanted to say. And people over the phone will be loud, impatient, and just kind of trying to get the thing without really listening. And the fact is, the people who are calling, our client who are calling, they are the people who has been repeatedly abused and traumatized. And this is so hard for them to take this action. So if this is the experience they have, I can't by any means encourage our client continue to do this. So I just, this is what I want to say about, our experience with that. So just wanted to share that with everyone.
And
Hey,
Joyce,
Ryan.
you raise it. Oh,
Dear
sorry, go
Ryan,
ahead, Bessa.
if I may, could you ask Dr. Hunt, Dr. Hunt, if you could share the slideshow with all of us, would be great. It's really,
Yes.
a lot of great information there for all of us here to really digest it. Thank you.
Yes, I will do that. Happy to.
And Joyce, you raise a really important point, as I mentioned earlier, the language line that we're able to use sometimes it's great in an emergency. It is certainly not a good vehicle for trying to have somebody describe what often is a very complicated relationship and process. And, it gives me an idea, and maybe this is something we work on as a task force. For instance, and I'm so disheartened to hear about that experience with an interpreter, but certainly for us, and I think is probably true for the police departments, when we call one of the interpreter services, we sort of get who's available to come. And maybe what we think about and maybe what we really need is to try to develop sort of a circle of interpreters who we do some training with around domestic violence and sexual assault, so that they are not, if that was the case, they're not uncomfortable, they're not embarrassed by what they might be hearing. Because, right now we're getting the same from the same pool of interpreters that go to a hospital, go to a school, whatever. They don't have any particularized training around that. I know yesterday we talked with Bob Cox, the head of the Bridge Club up in Lowell, about, and Dr. maybe you have a thought about this, which was they were talking about how difficult it is to get members of the AAPI community who might have a substance issue to go to some substance treatment because of the language issue. So they've begun a program, and for anybody who's interested, they have a new one starting again on Saturday, of training members of the AAPI community in their own languages to be recovery coaches and to do the training, so that people could go to a substance abuse treatment program conducted in their own language. They did their first class a couple of months ago and trained about 25 people. They're doing another one on Saturday. It just occurs to me that that might be a good task for us, to be getting some interpreters that we're training in these areas, and a way to, when we need somebody to, giving people better access to somebody who not only technically speaks their language, but has some experience training. Doctor, do you have an opinion about, do you think that would be helpful if we could get sort of a pool of interpreters who had some domestic violence training sort of thing? I don't know if she can hear me. Doctor, can you hear us?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. So do you think that would be helpful if we could get, for instance, some interpreters who had some domestic violence training themselves?
Oh, that would be really wonderful. Yes, that would be, because it is so true. It's not only about.
Yeah, well, what I'll do is, and I'll get what's called a plot plan.
I'm sorry, if somebody can mute.
So it's up to you. So
that
are
is.
you looking for?
Hello? Okay, there we go. Okay, sorry, doctor.
Okay, so I was confused. No problem. So it is, yes, it is. The training is really absolutely necessary, because it's not really word-to-word translation, and the context is really important. So understanding the context from the victim side, as well as the other side who want to help out, really need to be equipped with deeper knowledge level. So I totally agree with Joyce, Carol. Thank you so much.
Other thoughts, questions, suggestions of where we go from here?
I see some hands up.
Oh, I'm sorry. People, please feel free to just unmute yourself, because for some reason I'm not seeing the hands.
How about Representative Gouveia goes, and then I will go after.
Okay.
Great.
I just wanted to share a couple things that came up in the House budget that we passed last night. Hopefully some of these things will carry over into the Senate, but we did make an investment. I will try to find out how much it is, $300,000 to basically do some studies on the history and experiences of anti-Asian racism in the United States. So that is something that I think is pretty promising. It was filed by Representative Chairman Taki Chan. There was also, we passed making a permanent commission on Asian Americans and their experiences, but also providing support to the business and the education and all different stakeholders in the state around supporting Asian Americans, AAPI in our communities and across the Commonwealth. And then that was also filed by Chairman Chan. And then he also has a bill that I think really speaks to some of your earlier slides. And I just want to thank you so much, Dr. Ham, for your presentation. I grew up in the city of Lowell, so I know that the experience of Asian Americans in the city of Lowell is much different than the experience of the Asian Americans who live in the district that I represent, which is predominantly Indian and also Chinese American. And just looking at your charts and seeing the differences between different populations and depending on what their route of entry was coming to the United States and what their experience was. So the disaggregation bill is really, really important. And it is one that I will say, higher income, more educated Asian Americans, some of them push back in our community around wanting to have that data disaggregated.
Yes.
So anything that folks can do to help us communicate the critical importance of telling the true stories that Asian Americans are not a monolith and that it's really important to have that data disaggregated so that we can really appreciate the diversity in the experiences and the extreme inequities that various Asian populations experience. So I just really appreciate your slides because it really speaks to that issue that I know so many people have on this call have been advocating for and talking about as well. So just want to thank you all, and I can't wait to get your slides and dig into them more. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
So that was actually a perfect setup because I wanted to talk a little bit about being a South Asian in the AAPI community. And the question that I really had for you, Dr. Ham, and thank you so much for your presentation, because I do think there's so much intersections between these disparate communities that I go back and forth on the disaggregation idea, because if their numbers are so small, then that number that's so small might get completely ignored. That's sort of the pushback on some of it. My question for you is, since we are such a large community of Asians, oftentimes I've felt like I struggle with ways to connect within the AAPI community to support one another as we go forward to tackle issues that face all of us within this community, even though we have so many differences. So could you talk about some of those strategies and the benefits that could come out of, in some ways, aggregating us and having us work together on some of these issues?
Yes. It's a really, really important question. And obviously, there is no simple answer to that, but I can just share with what I've been observing from the people there who participate in our study. So what the data tells. So, when we investigated more than 2,000 Asian American women and young adults and then, adolescents, one thing which was really missing was that they didn't have a story of their immigration, their parents' immigration, their grandparents' stories. There was a stark difference between Black families or white families or other racial groups, because there are so many books available and there's a lot of education going on in terms of talking about the history, right? But then when we investigated the Asian American women, they really didn't have a good understanding of how their grandparents met each other, what kind of language they used, or where they were even born. That was completely missing. Okay. In part is because there's no education at the school, no education on that particular understanding history and the roots and the stories around the immigration and stories. Those are have not been really discussed in the home setting, in the community level, and at the school setting. So when you are missing, those information or materials are missing, what happens to the adolescents or the young adults is that it's missing their identity. On top of that, Asian American families or communities, we are missing mentors, the big figure, okay? And as I talked about it, Asian American women, the most difficult group to get to the highest level in America. And the number of the congressmen is so few, right? So that's part of another reason why we just don't have a representative that who we are admiring, who we are aspiring to become. So I think the efforts has to be really systemic. In order for us to fight these systemic problems, the effort has to be done systematically. So one thing that we can do is that we need to disrupt the status quo. What that means is that we need to look around where we belong to. We have to always start from where we are, right? Close proximity. So looking at where you are, in your office, look at Asian American representatives. Do we have enough? Do we have enough professors, for instance? Do we have enough congresswomen? Do we have enough people? Do we have enough DAs? If we don't have enough, then we need to find a way to support. Okay? If we don't disrupt this status quo, I don't think things are going to change. So going back to what you said, the beautiful thing about having holidays, when you look at Jewish culture, there are holidays, right, that we have to off the score for Jewish culture. But what it does for the Jewish families is that it recognizes the importance of the ancestors, what they have done. And it gives an opportunity for the family members or the neighbors get together to celebrate their tradition. But for Asians, those are missing. So we don't even have a time or space to talk about those things. To celebrate what? Celebrate what? Right? And when you don't even know who you are, how can you know or understand your neighbors? Like, I'm a South Korean, I came from South Korea, like Japanese and Chinese, So I think that will take time, but the recognition and awareness and what it does to you and your children, the community level, I think that is really important.
Other questions, comments?
Dr. Hom?
Yes.
Getting back to the incidences and the increases in the bias incidents that have been happening over, in particular, the past year during COVID, should we as practitioners in the field be expecting that some of those external pressures that are being brought to bear on people within the AAPI community might then lead to increases in incidences within the familial or setting? So meaning that with a lot of communities, when there's a lot of external pressures and bias would be one of those, obviously, that you mentioned that there's a lot of fear and people are very concerned for their safety. Does that pressure from these increased incidences, then should we expect that to potentially be a factor in increased familial pressures and potentially domestic violence as well?
I think you're bringing up really important issues. And I think that, yes, potentially yes. But what we see is that immediately we were able to find from my own research that experiencing discrimination that was associated with the increases in PTSD symptoms. Okay. And at that time, we did not find the association between exposure of PTSD, exposure of the COVID-related discrimination and the depression. But I think over time, they are going to be more depressed. And they are going to be also very anxious. They are very anxious. And I mean, even myself, like, you know, it was really hard for me to even, I tend to now, oh, I have to calculate, should I go to that place or not? And I love to walk around, you know, I love to walk, but I had to stop walking because I don't know, but I live in Newton. Even in Newton, you have to kind of calculate that. Then if you live in some other unsafe area, how, you know, so these people are stuck in their home for 4 weeks. Some of them are living in their home. They're just, you know, ordering, or there's some friends are bringing the food over. It is very, very terrible. So I think that, going back to your question, not only is it impacting, okay, not only is it impacting their own mental health, but there's the stress related to all this. And also you saw the unemployment rate, right? Unemployment rate, the Asian Americans are one of the hardest hit by the group that which is hardest hit by the COVID-19. But media doesn't necessarily talk about this. So I think this is going to be a real issue, which is going to have a total increase in domestic violence, you know, potentially. Because when you have economic dire situation, what happens? You know, it's just going to be very, very tough. And I'm really worried about this group. On top of that, those children are not, they don't want to go back to school. And some of the parents are afraid of, you know, those children being targeted at school. So they're always staying home together, right? When you guys are staying home together with the children, you know that, right? What it's like. Of course, it increases the stress level for every single one. So I feel like we're just waiting for the bomb to be exploded among Asian American community. And I think that we need to be prepared for that, you know, with a more active resources, and trying to put more resources and try to really understand and trying to prevent some of the after effects of COVID-19.
Excuse me, if okay, I can, for me to share one more thing.
Of course.
Thank you. So in the beginning of COVID, we have a staff, most of our staff working offsite remotely, but because we have a shelter, so shelter staff still need to go to work every day, like on daily basis, because shelter need to be 24/7 staffed. So we have a staff who is also Asian, and on the way, she walked to the office in the morning around 7 or 8 a.m. in the morning. She saw someone across the street and point a gun, and should be a toy gun, but she pointed a gun to her and making a gesture. And she was terrified at that moment. And she thought it's a toy gun because of the color, but she couldn't really tell. So when she got to the office, she called the police. She called the police department and saying that she wanted to report this incident. And the police tell her that this is not the right place to call. You should call 911. So she was then very fast transferred to 911. And then when she got to talk to the 911 operator, the operator on the other end told her because the incident has already gone, she has already left the scene. So this is really not a 911 case. So again, she said she's calling the wrong place. So she again got transferred back to, the 911 operator gave her a number and asked her to call this number, which turns out was the police department she just called. And so she made the third call, called the police department again. And the people who answered the call, and she tried to explain that, 911 take my call, but say this is not the case. And the police over the end saying that, oh, like we can't really do anything. So she later have to hang up and file a civil complaint and hasn't heard anything for the entire time. And I just want to say, this is our staff who speak fluent language and knows the system and can navigate with resources. So I just wanted to ask if that happened to our client, and I wanted to also hear from your thoughts, like what should we suggest our client to do? And what is the most, efficient way? If there's a possibility to have a task force, like when we call, they will know how to take on this instead of being transferred back and forth.
I don't know. I would add, I mean, that sounds like a crazy response. I'd ask some of our police partners that are here with us any thoughts, or is there a clearer way to navigate the sort of it? Yes, it's not a direct emergency happened kind of thing, or is that a training issue?
I'm not happy to hear that being an experience that you had. I hope it's not the Lowell Police Department. If it is, I'll gladly look into it and make sure that something happens, because it absolutely should not happen. Our 911 and our business line operators work in the same office, so you shouldn't be transferred back and forth like that. If you call for an emergency, 911 all the time always works. Business line is for maybe something where you just need somebody to respond to come out to you. For non-emergency stuff, but definitely not a response you should get for a person with a gun call at all in any way, shape, or form. But the bottom line is, if you or someone that you work with is in having an emergency, then definitely 911 is the way to go. Especially now with the updated cell phone system, where now we'll get that direct also instead of the state police. But yeah, I don't. That story is not a good one, and it is not indicative of the work we do here.
And another piece of that is sometimes, and it's technically correct, sometimes people may call the police and the police may say, well, what it is that happened is not actually a crime. And sometimes that may be true, but it doesn't really help the person to feel like something happened to me, but there's nothing I can do about it. So one of the things that we have developed as part of our anti-bias, anti-hate task force is a form which is available on our website. I encourage everybody to go on the website, take that form, distribute it as widely as possible. We really want to know what's happening in the community. So for instance, right now, if someone were to come down the street, your street where you live, and write some racial, ethnic, homophobic slurs or something on the street or the sidewalk outside, that might be a crime with the city or the town being the victim, but it's not a hate crime as to you, because right now the statute requires that you own the property that gets damaged. And we have filed a bill to change that, but while we wait, that technically is not a hate crime as to you. But I certainly want to know that that's happening in Middlesex County. So we are encouraging people to fill out that form. It's there. You're going to be able to fill it out right online. It will come to Antonia, who you met earlier. We are really tracking and creating a map that will really show us where these things are happening. Because one of the frustrating things, and Megan Kelly, our communications director, just put the in the chat where you get the form. One of the things that's very disheartening to us is something will happen in a community. We'll respond to that, and then we find out, and people say, and this I think is really wrong. People will say, well, this is like the other 6 things that happened here, and we have no idea about that. People feel like the incident's been ignored, but actually we never knew about it because there kind of wasn't a place for it to go. That's why we've really put ourselves in that kind of clearinghouse, and then people will be able to go on and look. You may have seen there is online. Harvard University developed a map of some of the incidents over the last year against the AAPI community. There have been 90, I forget whether it's 96 or 97 documented incidents in Massachusetts. Over 60 of them happened here in Middlesex County, a large number of them in Cambridge. So, we really want to know that and be able to think about education and outreach and prevention programs and where are we targeting those things. So please use that form. People can fill it out with their name. They can fill it out anonymously. At least somebody has a report of that. We're looking at that. It may be that something happens to them and they don't know, but then we're later able to connect it to other incidents that happen. So we are really trying to change how people experience having something happen and then feeling like that got attention.
Can I just
oh, sure, Mike, go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, I don't know how you do this, District Attorney Ryan, but every one of these task forces that I've ever participated in, including more opioid than this is my first time here. You blow me away every single time with your speakers. And I have to tell you, Dr. Ham, that at one point I was near tears when you were talking, because I have a very, very dear friend who is Asian and who was the health director in Framingham. And you may or may not know who I'm talking about by that description. And he was literally run out of town by a city councilor who attacked him every single way he could blame him for COVID happening in Framingham. And everybody in Framingham watched these city council meetings, and nobody spoke up about the fact that there had to be a tie between our health director being Asian and the comments and the attacks that were being made on him. And so I think really what I'm seeing, and I look at things from a public health standpoint naturally, and what I'm seeing is that we need to shine more light on this issue. And this has to become as much a part of the conversation as Black Lives Matter is. That this is the same exact, it's a derivative of the same hatred, but people see it and they don't speak up when it comes to Asians. If our health director was Black, none of those statements would have been made, because the politician would have known that he was never going to get reelected. But still to this day, people in Framingham, they hear it in their heads what he was saying, and it doesn't bother them. And that's very bothersome. And so, I just want to put that out there as an old white guy, that it's very troublesome to me to see how this is just under everybody's radar. And until the recent attacks, the recent AAPI attacks that have taken place, most people never knew those initials even existed before 2 months ago. So I congratulate you, and I hope that we can see you speaking in a lot of other places real soon, because you have a very, very important message. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Wonderful. And she's been so generous with her time and information to us. Any last questions? Well, as you can see, this is our first meeting of the new task force, and we have lots to be talking about. We will reconvene, and we will send out notice to all of that. In the meantime, please use the forms. Please reach out to us. Or contact, want to put your contact information in the chat so you'll have that. All right. And again, as so many people have said, Doctor, thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you to everyone for making time to be here. We are grateful. So thank you. Stay safe, stay well.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye-bye.